I'm really excited to introduce our panelists and our moderator today. So we're about to get into our first panel, which is drawing bodies. What does that mean? A lot of things. And we are going to be welcoming to the stage Bishakh Som. Bishakh is an Indian-American trans femme visual artist and author. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, Autostraddle, The Strumpet, Black Warrior Review, and the Brooklyn Rail, amongst many other publications. Her graphic novel, Apsara Engine, is the winner of the 2021 LA Times Book Prize for Best Graphic Novel and a 2021 Lambda Literary Award. And her graphic memoir, Spellbound, was also a 2021 Lambda Award finalist. So she's really exciting. Thank you, Bishakh, for coming and joining us today. Things are not in order, so I'm flipping. You know, choices were made. All right, the next person I'm going to introduce is Hazel Newlevant. Hazel is a cartoonist and editor whose No Ivy League, Sugartown, and If This Be Sin is in publication. They edited and published the anthologies Chainmail Bikini and Comics for Choice. Hazel's work can be found online at newlevant.com, so you can check out more of what they've got going on. I'm also really excited to introduce Aatmaja Pandya because this year, your debut graphic novel came out. Slip. No, I'm excited because your debut graphic novel came out. It's a middle grade novel. It's really exciting. Slip, but Aatmaja has been doing things for a really long time. She's an illustrator and cartoonist living in Brooklyn, so we love our New Yorkers. All of these folks here are New Yorkers. That's important. And she's been self-publishing since 2013, so we've been following you for a while. Another exciting panelist, because something very exciting came out very recently, is Daisy Ruiz, better known online as @Drazies. She is a Bronx-bred illustrator, founder, and creative director of award-winning compilation zine Deadass, NYC, and one-third of the woman of color art collective Spicy Mango Comics. Her illustrations take inspiration from her 5-year-long scene phase, okay? Her East Coast Chicana upbringing and everyday living in NYC. And her debut comic, not debut, but your big comic, Gordita, just came out. So we're really excited about that as well, and glad to have you on the panel. And last, but certainly not least, is our moderator, Sharon De La Cruz, who is many, many things. And there are many, many people on our schedule today. So excuse me for the flipping. Sharon is an illustrator, an author, an educator, a community worker who has put out several comic zines. You're working on a new one right now that's exciting, but we have I'm a Wild Seed for sale. It's a graphic memoir. And I'm really excited to have everyone come out onto the stage now and get into the panel itself. And I'm going to pass it on.
All right. We are ready for this space. Thank you, y'all, for coming to Drawing Bodies. I have a couple questions on my handy-dandy phone, so don't worry, I'm not multitasking. I'm just looking at questions here. But we'll have basically a casual conversation, and then I'm going to open up for audience questions. Does that sound good? Cool. All right, so this panel is called Drawing Bodies. And I was like, oh, I don't know, what what are we going to ask? How do I not make this corny? But I do have a corny question first, and then we'll dive into deeper questions. Also, shout out to Inez, who also added some questions in here. And then, of course, this will be open to all of you. So please, raise your hand, and I'll call on you, and then we'll ask the question. Cool. So the first question, very simple. What body parts do you hate drawing, and which do you love drawing?
I guess like I kind of hate drawing hands. Like it's a little hard. I feel like I've gotten much better at it. But usually I'm just taking like reference pictures of my own hands and being like, okay, that's how hands work. And my favorite part is probably like drawing like noses and lips.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm happy you said that because I'm including the face in the body. Controversial, you know? So, yes. And we don't all have to answer the same question, but for the first one, let's go around and then we'll get into our casual.
Okay. I think I'm the opposite. I really don't like drawing noses, and I like never do it if I can get away with it. I love drawing like necks and shoulders and backs, and I quite like hands, but also that's just because I'm crazy a little bit.
And we can maybe use that mic. Come on.
Oh, yeah.
It'll stretch all the way.
You go first.
Okay.
Okay. I don't really like drawing ears. They got too many weird little folds. I've never figured it out. But I have to agree with Aatmaja, or second what you were saying. I love drawing necks and shoulders, clavicles, lats. It's just a good area.
I'm trying to think of what I really don't like drawing. I'm not coming up with anything, strangely. I was going to say horses, but that's not a body part. So it's a body.
They have a body.
Yeah. So let's go with horses. I love drawing hair a lot, and strangely hands too. I know they're like kind of the hardest things to draw in terms of like their mechanics and structure, but I don't know. I get a kick out of it.
So you all, whether it's been published by big publishers or are self-published, you draw. I've been looking at your work, everyone's, and I know basically most of you all's work. There's a lot of bodies involved. Can you talk to any? In fact, let's start with Drazy, because I think your latest piece is very much body centered. So can you talk about maybe like your latest piece and how the body is centered in that story?
So Gordita Built Like This is about a 12-year-old girl who's in middle school, and she's going through puberty, but it hasn't really caught up to her like everyone else. So she still has like her baby fat, and like she is not curvaceous like everyone else in her class. And her family and people in her class bully her for being like flat-chested and all that. What was the question again?
So basically, how are you centering bodies in your story? Like, what's important about this particular body?
So what's important about Gordita's body is that she has like a lot of like belly fat, and usually like that's not really shown in comics. Like usually like everyone's like very fit, or they'll have like just one specific body type in the comic. But for me, I decided to use all different types of bodies for the comic because it's what I see in my community, and I wanted to reflect that, like how like not everyone's skinny, or if you are, like there's like other parts that are a little chubby. Yeah.
Cool. Anyone else? How do bodies show up in your comic? And if you need some time.
Yeah, I don't know if I have.
Okay, I like this question. Thank you. In my graphic novel that I'm working on right now, which is called Queer and How We Got Here, it's partly a transition memoir. So there's a lot of, a fair amount of like drawing the subtle changes in myself as I was taking testosterone. So get to try to subtly show things becoming more angular and more hairy. And there's also a lot of historical figures. So I end up trying to do a lot of likenesses of like activists that I admire and trying to balance like fitting them into this cartoon world, but have it still sort of be like, okay, yeah, that kind of looks like Leslie Feinberg. And yeah, doing likenesses, but trying to make it cartoony is really one of the things that I get the most of a kick out of, and I do that in with my autobiographical work too, I tend to draw people pretty similar to how they look in real life. And, you know, then that gets into issues of anonymity. Like, I'm not really visually anonymizing them, but I feel like there's just so much subtle information conveyed in somebody's appearance. Like, you know, if you're a tall, square-jawed white guy, you know, with blonde hair, like that really impacts how you're moving through the world. Or so I just don't want to totally scramble people's appearances around because it has so much information in it that I feel like I can't make up something like more better and more true than what's already there. You know, I'll only switch it up, like, I don't know, there's like I made my teenage crush blonde instead of brown haired just so that she would, you know, contrast a little bit more. But yeah, generally I'm trying to draw people how they look without being too tied into photo reference.
I'm also working on a new graphic novel, which is right now in the scripting phase, so I'm not quite ready to represent my characters visually, even though I have a sort of conceptual idea of what these people look like. And it's also a trans, it's a story about trans characters, and I guess just being part of, I mean, a lot of them are trans femmes and trans women, and getting to be part of that community in the past however many years, I think I've started to expand the spectrum of types of bodies that I've been drawing, with the great variety of bodies that I've I was going to say interacted with, but that sounds weird. So I have had the pleasure of witnessing. I'm going to dig my own grave here. But no, it's like, I think I was always stuck in a certain type of body representation in my very, very early work, which tended to be like these very ethereal, wispy characters. You know, it's very like informed by kind of sort of music and visuals that I was into, like, you know, Art Nouveau and stuff like this. But I think like having moved on to kind of ground myself in how to represent bodies more faithfully, I think there's such a variety that I'm, you know, just only in my dotage trying to get a grasp on. So I'm looking forward to taking the script that I'm working on and seeing how wide a variety of bodies, body types I can involve in my new book. Yeah.
Anyone else? Nope. Okay. Awesome. And so I think y'all started already talking about this, but I want to go back into like how comics, and I wrote this, how did I write this? Like, what about comics lends itself to talk about reflections on the body? Like, what's so special about comics, and in terms of like talking about bodies? Why not a film? Why not a interpret dance? Why a comic?
Well, like, I was thinking about this while everyone was answering, because I actually don't draw recently, I don't draw reflecting real life so much. The way I see my work is, like, kind of playing with dolls in a dollhouse. So, like, what I really like about comics is that you can create the world that you wish you lived in, or, like, the world that lives... there's no rule that says it has to look like real life. And I try very hard to make sure it, like, I'm not mimicking cinematography or photography. Like, I'm trying to create a world that could only live in a comic. And a big part of that is, like, creating a kind of body that simply couldn't exist otherwise. Like, with exaggeration, obviously, like cartoonish exaggeration, but also, like, hair that kind of defies gravity, and, like the sort of, like, liveliness and energy, like, that you feel when you're moving and living, but doesn't necessarily, like, reflect outwardly, because you just can't express that much physically without like contorting yourself or hurting yourself, right? I really like to explore that. Yeah, and I think it's something that comics particularly does very well. Comics and animation, I think, kind of go hand in hand.
With no shade towards prose writers, one thing
I already love the way that started. Yes. Great.
well, one thing I love about comics that I think we have gives us an advantage in some ways over like just straight up text is having to on the written page, you're forced to describe you're forced to point out which character is saying what, right? So it's a constant sort of iteration of they said, or he said, or Joan said, or Paul said, whatever, right? You keep having to reiterate that. With comics, you don't, because the characters are speaking and it's clear who's speaking. But every time a character says something, it's a new opportunity, not only in the secondary or tertiary function of the character speaking is to let you know that they are speaking, but as they're speaking, you also get to reflect on their physicality, right? It's an opportunity not only to say this character is speaking, but look at their, it gives you, every panel gives you an opportunity to elaborate on the physicality of the character, right? So I think like it's not just a sort of function of having to point out which character is saying what, but every time it's a new opportunity to embellish or elaborate on or notice a detail in this character's face or hair or something. You can zoom in on a nose ring or an ear, and the dialogue keeps going. So it's like operating on so many different levels simultaneously, and I think that's just like such a richness that prose maybe doesn't have. So.
Anyone else? All right. Another question is, how do you draw right bodies unlike your own without misrepresenting them? Bishakh, we're going to leave you for last because I feel like you were. How do you do that? But honestly, I feel like not only in drawing, in prose, when making art, how do you think about that?
So one of the characters in my comic, her name is Cassandra, and she's like a really curvy, like 13-year-old girl. And she's curvy, but I didn't make her sexy. Like she's represented like a normal girl, like there's ways of drawing like curvy bodies without like sexualizing them. Like it's not like her boobs are like all the way out here and her butt, and so with all the bodies, like I feel like they're like respectfully drawn, and you can kind of tell like everyone's distinct personalities through the way that they dress and like the faces they make and everything.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about maybe how they dress?
Oh,
That's a big deal.
yeah. So in the comic, it takes place in 2003. So everyone's dressed like very early 2000s, but specifically South Bronx hood style of dressing. So it's like a lot of like Pepe jeans and Knicks jersey dresses. Yeah.
Which I wore.
And trip pants, Fat Farm, G Unit.
Yeah. Looney Tune characters.
Yeah.
like baggy pants.
Lot 29. Yeah.
Awesome.
I try to use a ton of photo reference, and I try to be academic as far as where it comes from. I've found myself using more like the NYPL has a great photo archive. I use something called the Digital Transgender Archive a lot, which is just amazing. It's very like broadly encompassing of like just different kinds of gender crossing, not just what, people who would identify as transgender right now, but like you can set the date parameters, which I love. Yeah, that's a lot of what I end up, because I want to ideally I certainly want to know when the photo came from because I'm trying to accurately portray a bunch of different time periods. So yeah, trying to use those more formal resources to know where these things are coming from because it's stuff that I'm not gonna get in just a Google image search or a Pinterest search. And yeah, I'm definitely heavily reliant on that as far as, expanding just whatever, narrow stereotypes I have absorbed about how certain people might look, trying to take in new information.
You said so much that I'm like, oh, we could spend a whole panel just talking about. One, can you just rename the archive?
Yes, it's the Digital Transgender Archive. I can't remember what their website is, but yeah, I love it. It's so great for image search.
I did not know about that archive.
Yeah, and if you're, trying to, it's so good, if you're trying to draw passing women in the 20s or trans women in the 70s or whatever.
Because they existed, right?
Yes.
That's always fun. Okay, beautiful. Anyone else?
I mean, this is something I've been thinking a lot about in the past, 3-4 years. It's like the obvious answer is to draw upon your own, life and experiences, right? But the more I think about it, the more I think, like Hazel said, it's kind of a very narrow scope of, what the world looks like, even if your world is not what is normally depicted in media. And, lately, also, I've been feeling kind of a weird, frustration with the media landscape where the answer to this representation problem is to just throw this hodgepodge of people of all different shades of brown and lumps of fat on their body into a scene. Something about that really pisses me off because it's very easy to tell when it's inauthentic, and it's also easy to tell when someone isn't living in that body and drawing it, right? So I would prefer, I don't want to see that really, but in my mind I'm constantly kind of going back and forth between well, that's better than the alternative, isn't it? Or what's the way to make that feel more authentic? Or do I just would prefer people to draw based only on their own experiences, Yeah, I mean, I haven't really figured out the answer, but I think Hazel's got it right, where it ultimately comes from sort of empathy and careful observation and learning. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Because I think the immediate question that I was going to ask is, how do you do that carefully, right? And unfortunately, sometimes it's not that obvious, right? So how do you do that carefully? Maybe not in general, but for yourself, how are you careful in the work? Yeah. And I know Hazel mentioned, archive. Is there another way that we're careful in, representing other people in our work?
I don't think this answers your latest question, but your first question made me think that I've to some degree I've been staying in my own lane when it comes to representation, because a lot of the stories and characters that I've been focusing on recently have only encompassed South Asian trans women, and I'm I feel like I'm okay to do to have some license or liberty within that scope, right? But then it makes me think there's not a great deal of variety in the characterizations and the types of people that are represented. But I think that's okay, because the stories are not necessarily about diversity and variety, but because South Asian women and trans, whether cis or trans, just don't show up in comics that often. So I think it's okay to just focus on them for a while, and then maybe I'll have played that out at some point at which and then I'd have to start thinking about wider issues of representation.
That's a really beautiful point, that you don't have to. What feels like doing too much is probably trying to overcompensate for something, and you're relax.
For a guilt that exists in you. Just for a guilt that exists in you, and I think it's worth examining whether or not that guilt is helpful in any way,
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, I have one more question, and then we will open it up to our lovely audience. Well, I guess it was more of a reflection. I was thinking about, I'm formulating an idea of basically a story of like my middle school experience in the South Bronx. I grew up on Hoe Avenue, fun times, but I also went to school on Fale Street, which is like, but it's not. It was actually named after a family called the Fale family, and it's spelled Faile. But upon kind of like reflecting, I'm like, oh, what a good book this is gonna be, right? Like you're going to school on Fale Street, fun times. But obviously it's going to be a fiction. A fiction kind of, or yeah, I guess like a fiction retelling of like my middle school time. But I thought of even just like how nice it would have been if I had the word non-binary, at that time, and like what would have shifted for me in middle school. And so kind of maybe thinking about it in not misrepresenting someone, but like perhaps how could I have benefit from like the words and people, if it was just a little, maybe just not what I had in front of me, So I'm kind of thinking of bodies in that way, and like, dang, what did I need in middle school? Because when someone called me a boy, I was like, ugh. I had a bully who called me a boy, and I was like, I'm not a boy. And then when I looked down, and I was like, yeah, they got a point, right? So it's very interesting what we take in, maybe without the language, without having the language. But I want to open it up to our lovely audience, and if anyone has a question. Again, maybe not. We don't have to like super focus on bodies, but this is the Drawing Bodies panel, so yes.
As all of you are artists and practitioners, do you see a point further in your careers where you would become publishers to enable the work that you didn't see? Or what would your idea, if that's too far future an answer, what do you think the ideal publisher would look like for you today? Things have sort of changed. Not necessarily for the better in some cases.
Well, I have published a couple of anthologies, which has been just one of my favorite things, because I don't know, it's so great. You can go around to all your favorite people and be like, hey, you got any pitches on such and such subject, or just try to open it up to submissions. And that's something that I feel like works very well for more entry-level publishing, because it crowdfunds really well, if you're reaching out to every different contributors, fans and supporters and whatnot. And if you're only doing if everybody's working on their own 6 pages at the same time, it comes together really fast as compared to like a 200 or 300 page graphic novel. But in terms of an ideal publisher, I don't know. It's all about the money. It's all about figuring out how to pay people as soon as possible and as much as possible, because that's low payment, and not being able to rely on when it's coming in are just huge barriers to who can make work.
Well, when I first started, like in my art career, I would publish other people's work in like a compilation zine, and it was like about just like living in the hood and like everyone's like individual experiences, and then putting it together in a zine because we saw that our neighborhood was starting to get gentrified. So I don't think I'm interested in like becoming a publisher anymore. Like I just don't have the money. Like I'd rather just like tell my stories now. Yeah.
I'm thinking also diverse editors. How about that one? That's a big deal, right? You're working closely with an editor, and to differentiate, like to make the differentiation between like the structure of a story and whether that makes sense versus like culturally that I don't understand something. I think it's a really big misnomer or just kind of like happens way too often, and you end up having to like explain culturally like what you mean, whereas I don't think we want to explain culturally. Yeah.
Okay, so my editor and publisher, Jamila at Black Jose Press, I feel like she's giving me the liberty of making my comic the way I wanted it to, because I don't think a publisher that isn't from the Bronx would like understand the language, because like a lot of AAAV is spoken in the book because it's about the South Bronx, and it's very influenced by Black culture. And so I feel like she understands me, and she doesn't give me edits like, oh, like I don't think like this should be here, or like this sentence structure is worded differently. Like no, she understands what I'm saying. Yeah.
And what's the difference between like proper, what is proper, right, or and what is intentional, right? Like culturally intentional. Anyone else?
Yeah, it's like the problem with publishing right now is that it's so oriented on producing, like creating product that sells, and is like you can take it into like franchises, and then when you focus on that, you stop letting your artists have the license to do what they want and like create art in the truest sense, which is like, you know, not afraid of expectations and performance, right? It's just made for the sake of telling a story or loving to draw, right? So yeah, it's like I actually am kind of not sure if like publishing, even with the like the injection of all these new voices and like new energy, is going to benefit like the making of art, like, you know, authentic art in the future or not, because it seems like the direction now is like relying on us as individuals, as like smaller presses, like, you know, giving their artists the freedom to make art the way they want to. Yeah.
Any other questions? Carlos, and then we'll go here.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for being in this panel.
Yeah.
So informative. I was coming here with like a question of my own. I don't know if you've already touched upon it before, but like I want to know like what do you do when how do you create a character so that, you know, if it's like a black and white comic, how do you make a character that is not a stereotype, but also not assumed like a white character, right? People, like, you know what I mean? Like, how do you go about creating a character that is like,
Multi-dimensional, authentic, but not a stereotype?
yeah, I
And
guess
not a
it's
stereotype.
Like, how do you create something that is like not assumed like a white character, but also doesn't go into like stereotype?
Like caricature.
A caricature. Okay. Thank you, Carlos. Yeah. That's a good question.
I mean, you know, when it's a color comic, when the comic's in color, that's easy, right? But when it's black and white, you know, especially like people who do black and white comics, how do you not go into the stereotype?
Right.
How do you not cross that line?
That's a challenge. Are we allowed to use halftones?
Right.
Shades of gray?
I'm gonna say yes.
Okay, yeah, that would be part of it for sure. But shit, I don't know. You just have to keep looking at it and go, does this look like any character that I've ever seen that I'm aware of? Or, you know, you could delineate things by people's name too. That communicates a lot.
So the way that I personally approach characters is like I use like shading and inking to convey like their skin tone. So even though right now the comic is in black and white, you can still tell like they're either a person of color or something. And like I said before, I really like drawing like their facial features, like the way that they are. I like drawing like hair texture. I like showing that like their fashion, and like through their fashion you can even tell like what like their socioeconomic status is, and also like what they do. So like in my comic, the character goes back home to the studio apartment that she and her mom share, and you see like the way they interact with the world. So like their pantry, they have like the maseca and the nopales in there. Yeah, so it's like, oh, you can tell that they're Mexican, but it's not because there's like a huge Mexican flag or because they're like listening to like mariachi or something, you know. Like it's there because it's like them living their normal lives. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
I was gonna, yeah. I think beyond the question of skin color, there's so much that you can do with hair, right? With facial features, with clothing, accessories, jewelry, but also dialogue, right? Like, what does this character say? How do they say the things they say? Do they have like inflection, like linguistic sort of inflections in their speech or whatever? Maybe it's like a character you assumed was white, then opens their mouth, and then it's clear that you know there's something else entirely. So it's like, yeah, it's all the tools that we have as cartoonists can lend themselves to either making a character more multifaceted or subverting, you know, the reader's expectations based on like the sort of gap between text and image.
All right, we have time for one more question. Yes, thank you.
Hi, thank you. This panel's been great. In terms of like the craft and technique for drawing bodies, a few of you mentioned using reference photos a lot. Is there anything else that you've done to sort of be able to build up your skills in terms of drawing bodies and different kinds of bodies? And is that different in any way from how you think about just your craft in general, being able to draw like a chair or a building or something of nature?
I'll start with that one. Tom Motley, who's a illustrator and really amazing educator at SVA, had us do like really amazing exercises that I will never forget, which is just kind of like scribbling, you know, on the paper and then drawing bodies in those shapes. So you would draw like random organic shapes, and then you'd have to kind of like draw this like contorted, you know, body in there. What I like to do is I do use references, but sometimes I like to purposefully not use a reference to just see how I think something looks, so that I'm not tied into making something look realistic necessarily, because it won't like fit the style that I'm going for. So I think it's like a tug and pull, you know, like where you're just like, oh, I really need to see how a body waves, you know, or like how a hand waves, because I've forgotten. First is like, you know, maybe the elbow doesn't have to be like the exact, like super realistic, but.
Yeah, like you mentioned, what's the difference between a body and a chair, right? The difference is that the body's alive. So, like, observation is such a crucial tool, obviously, and it takes you so far, but it is very easy, I think, like you said, to get caught up in exactly reproducing a picture or, like, a reference that you lose the life in a figure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, like, has to do with, like, looseness in your own drawing technique, expressiveness, energy, and also, like, yeah, like I was taught similarly, or learned that like to at some point trust your own hand and your own library in your head, and draw the way you think, reference something after you already have your mental picture down, but don't don't forget that you are someone who has like learned to draw and has like has that like mental library ready. And that like translation from your brain right into your hand keeps that like energy alive.
I don't use a lot of photo reference, but one thing I've been thinking about a lot recently that I have been doing a little research on in terms of like sort of models of like, you know, sort of digital archives of body types is aging bodies and how like at some point I realized I didn't know how to draw a convincing aging, what happens to the body as it ages. So I think that's something I've been looking into as I grow older and as there are older characters in my work. And I'm focusing mainly on like trans bodies, and specifically trans women's bodies, and cis women's bodies too. But yeah, and so it's something that I've been thinking about it, that I want to. Bringing up the question makes me think a lot about like why that's the one sort of area that I'm focusing on. Maybe I should like expand on like the palette of body types that I actually do some research on. I don't know.
I don't know. I love to do a life drawing. Obviously, that's a part of a lot of art education programs, and I mean that kind of helps you build up your mental library. But then also you notice the limitation of the kind of models you're bringing in. Not a whole lot of aging life drawing models, I feel like. I love to just draw my friends and do really quick gestures, which I feel like translates very well into cartooning, because that's basically the same process as like starting out a thumbnail. But I don't know. I just have tried to do a lot of drawing from life to build the mental library while being respectful, because you don't want to be that person on the subway.
Right. But there are a lot of subway staring. Back in the day, I was like, oh, yeah. Okay, I think we are going to close the panel unless someone is like dying for a question here. Yeah. All right. Oh, yes, one more.
We can't hear you.
Sorry.
What would your advice be for someone trying to start out drawing like more complicated bodies and that?
Figure drawing classes or like meetups are kind of, like a go-to, but anyone else?
I used to go to what's it called, the Society of Illustrators, and they have like on Tuesdays and Thursdays they have like a drawing class from I think 7:30 or something to I don't know when anymore. And also I take a lot of pictures of like my family and stuff, and then I'll draw them. Yeah, that's how I've built up my body repertoire. Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, I think, not to go teacher on you, I think the answer is just to practice. I'm very sorry. It's just a lot of observation and practice. But before you know it, you will like try. Do you like work with stylized figures? As you start drawing more realistically and practicing that, like before you know it, that will translate back to your stylized work. Like a lot of it is unconscious. I do think like with stylized work, you can at least push your silhouettes and like your proportions. Just keep in mind that you're not drawing the same character over and over. Like, and just be aware that it's gonna suck and you're gonna hate it, but like it doesn't matter because you don't have to show it to anyone. If you just keep one sketchbook that's your garbage sketchbook, and you just like give yourself a tiny homework assignment every day, that kind of thing, like it's for you, it's for your craft, and it will pay off so much faster than you think it will, even if it feels miserable in the moment.
And just, I don't know, I find the detailed observation that goes into, trying to draw people from life or from reference or whatever to be like a satisfying process in itself, even if you aren't happy with the result. At least you spent that time observing the details and the contours of someone, which is a cool thing in itself.
This is not something I ever did myself, but like,
I respect that.
is I would say just if you're into getting into the nitty gritty, I would say buy a book on anatomy and just focus on like muscle groups and stuff like that. I learned to draw. This is going to sound ridiculous, but the book that really launched me into drawing bodies or having like a very rudimentary understanding of bodies was How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, and that.
It's a classic.
It's a class. Okay, I don't need to be apologetic about it. So, thank you. But yeah, even something as sort of rudimentary as that is a nice entry point into then moving on to more technical aspects, or expanding your understanding of anatomy and musculature and skeletal structure and stuff. So I'm just going to go old school and say, go to the library and get out like 3 books on the way bodies work. I don't know. Sorry.
So from Hazel, we're going to start with Hazel, and then we'll go over this way. Where can we find you? We want to know more. We're excited.
All right. Just Google my last name, which is spelled Newlevant. I'm the only one. So if you find that on Google or Instagram or Twitter, you can keep up it. Which is, so just go look behind that sign at my thermos that I threw on the ground. And yeah, just you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll let you know how my book is going.
Yeah.
I'm also on Instagram. If you just Google my last name is easier to spell. It's SOM, but my first name is Bishakh, Bishakh. So I have a website too. If you just Google my name, I think it's the first thing that pops up. And my books are available through streetnoisebooks.com and from the Feminist Press. And I've got a book coming out, God knows when, through Abrams at some points, but that there's nothing to talk about yet with that.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I have an extremely Googleable name, so just put it into the search engine, baby. Yeah, I don't know. I have another book coming out eventually, but I have one right now at the bookstore. But yeah, I'm online. The one right now? Slip. Yeah, it's a YA, so buy it for your teenager. Thank you, Mika.
You can find me on Instagram at Draizys, DRAIZYS. And my comic is dropping the end of October through blackjosepress.com.
All right, and I'm Sharon Lee De La Cruz. You can find me at SharonLeeDeLaCruz.com and at Sharon Lee De La Cruz. So y'all are gonna Sharon Lee De La Cruz. That's my whole name. Yes. So all of it, you can find me there on social media. It's been a pleasure, and thank you all so much.